said sweet.
Oh, you said.
I'm sorry.
You said wait. I was like, okay.
I'll shut up.
Our featured guest of the hour, Mr. Jed Meshew of MMAfighting.com. Jed, thanks for being on the show with us today to talk UFC 202. How are you doing?
I'm good. No need to stop your political discourse on my account if you want to keep on going down that line.
We were just talking. There's bad on both sides, and it's just painful. It's painful to watch. It's painful, and you're just sitting here like, oh my goodness. We have about, 78 more days of this?
I think so, yeah.
Something like that.
So, but we want to welcome you to the show. Before we get to the main event, what do you think of the overall card tonight?
So UFC 202 I think it's a pretty good card, but it really is a top-heavy card. You know, they do this a lot, especially with their bigger stars. They don't stack the undercards as much with. They're interesting fights in a lot of ways, but they're not huge or big on name value because they don't need to. Like Conor McGregor, Nate Diaz is going to draw. You could put two people from the street fighting in the undercard; it wouldn't matter. So, it's fun. I watch everything, so I always think there are very few fight cards, and I'm just like, oh, this is trash, and I don't want to watch it. But this really is a two-fight card. The main event and the co-main event are easily the most exciting thing here.
So, win or lose, was it smart for Conor McGregor to move up to 170 for Diaz? And what do you think of jumping up two weight classes?
I think this has been a really bad decision by Conor McGregor all the way around. If he wins, then okay, he won, and that's good. I think rematching Nate Diaz makes sense only from a monetary standpoint because this is a big fight and it will draw money. But I think that this was a back pocket fight. They could have done this rematch at any point down in the future now, so they didn't need to run it immediately. And Conor could have built himself a little more of a cushion by going back to 145 and fighting Frankie Edgar or doing any number of other things. I think he's going to get his ass beat tomorrow. And I say that believing that Conor McGregor is a phenomenal fighter and one of the best fighters in the sport, but styles make fights. And, you know, in the community, there's been a lot of talk and hemming and hawing and, oh, is he going to win? Or, you know, and sometimes we overthink things, and it's really simple. And the reality is Nate Diaz came in on 10 days' notice when he was drinking in Cabo and beat him in 2 rounds. Now he has a full fight camp. And it's just that simple sometimes. And I think that for all of the ways everybody is trying to couch it, or, you know, Conor has a chance to win. He's a great fighter, and Nate Diaz has stylistic deficiencies. But for all the people that are picking Conor McGregor and thinking something's going to be different, I think this is going to be one of those times where we all think, oh, well, this was dumb. We couldn't see the forest for the trees. And I just think Conor doing this doesn't make – it reeks of an ego thing to me, which isn't the best for your brand, however if you want to go with that. Because then now he's going to have – I mean, assuming he does lose, which I think is by far the most likely scenario, then he's got 2 losses in a row, and it doesn't really hurt his brand. He's still the featherweight champion. He still can, you know, go fight Jose Aldo and probably win that fight. And, you know, his star power won't really lack, but he's just got 2 losses to a middling lightweight, which isn't good. And the doing it at 170 pounds is really, really dumb. I don't understand that at all. It's a weird thing, but it's interesting and it's compelling, and people are going to buy it and show up. So that's good.
Yeah, I think it's. I'm glad. But why this is Todd? I'm glad that you mentioned the fact that moving up just didn't make sense. As I've had a discussion off and on with someone who keeps on calling up, oh, what about the Gracie family? And it's like, you're talking about fights that happened 15, 20 years ago before MMA evolved. I mean, it's not the same thing at all. I mean, you don't move up 2 weight classes and win against a world class. Diaz is not at his weight class, which is really 155. Of course, he's not McGregor's equal within his class, but he's a world class fighter. I mean, yeah, McGregor could beat up some guy who's 170, some guy, but not a world class fighter. I mean, he can do it, but it's not likely, like you said. So you pretty much touched on it. But what do you think Diaz is going to do to win again? Basically the same, or do you see any wrinkles coming out of his fight plan?
Well, before I touch on this, I do just want to just dial back onto the 170 thing. I think it is stupid to have this fight at 170 because it makes no sense. I think Nate Diaz is a bigger man than Conor McGregor, and you can't argue that point. But he's not going to be substantially larger. I mean, depending on your definition of substantial, I suppose. Nate Diaz is a 155er. He's competed at 170 before, and he looked awful. Nate Diaz is a 155er. Realistically, Conor McGregor at this point might be a 155er. There's been a lot of speculation that he physically can't make 145 pounds. He's enormous for the weight division and always had arguably the biggest cut in the division. And now he seems to have put on a little more muscle because he was going up. So I don't know. That's all speculation. But doing it 170 seems really stupid because they're both ostensibly 155ers. So just do it there. And I really think that doing it at 170 thing is a face-saving maneuver. It's a backdoor for, because that's what happened. Now I went up 2 weight classes. You kind of went up 2 weight classes. You really went up 1 weight class, but you kind of went up 2 weight classes. So that's sort of what I think about that. But on your question, I think Nate Diaz doesn't have to do anything different, and and realistically, Nate Diaz doesn't ever do things differently. Nate Diaz has a style. He's improved his style, and I don't think he gets enough credit for that because people are, especially after the Conor fight, a lot of people were quick to blame Conor much and not give Nate as much credit for his successes and his improvements. And he has sharpened and honed his style, but he is fundamentally the same fighter he's been for most of his career. He doesn't have to do anything different, and that's I have an article coming up later today on MMA fighting. I think it drops at 11. So yeah, there's a plug. Check that out, MMAfighting.com. And it kind of goes into this. Nate doesn't have to do anything different. He came in on 10 days notice and he just fought like who he is, and he won convincingly in under 10 minutes. Conor has to do a lot differently, and not only do a lot differently, he has to fundamentally change who he is. Like, Conor's style, he after the fight, he said a lot of things like, "Oh, I got tired, and I was inefficient with my energy." That was the buzz line, and that he just needs to kind of adjust some things. And people are saying, "Well, Conor's not going to get tired this time." And to me, I'm just like, what are you talking about? He had a full training camp. He had a full fight camp to have his cardio in place. Like he won the first round, and then he lost because his style is one where he throws a ton of volume and he pressures and he throws a lot of power shots, and people wilt under that power. It's what he does. Or he's hitting them so hard that they suffer more cardio damage than he does, because getting your ass beat hurts. Nate Diaz isn't going to wilt. He's going to have better cardio this time. He just has to do the exact same things. Conor needs to not. For Conor to win, he's got to be a much more disciplined fighter. He has to stay on the outside. He has to work leg kicks. He has to do a lot of things that he can do. He totally has the ability and the skills to beat Nate Diaz, but it is very hard to fight against your natural instincts, and to do it for 5 full rounds, and to do it against a guy who's probably in his head. I think it's an arguable thing, but I think Nate clearly has him rattled, and it's really hard to do it against the Diaz brothers. Their entire game is built around mocking you in the cage and making you, lose your shit. When Nick Diaz fought Carlos Condit, he he did so much to him, and Carlos Condit is the blueprint for Conor McGregor.
Right.
Carlos Condit's style is one of coming forward, putting pressure, volume, making people wilt and crack under the pressure. But against Nick Diaz, he realized correctly that anyone who has fought that type of fight, aka a Diaz style, against the Diaz brothers loses. Like that, you can't beat them doing that. You just cannot do it. They are the best at it. So you have to fundamentally change who you are in there for that one fight, and that's what Carlos Condit did. He stuck on the outside, worked a heavy diet of leg kicks. He didn't get drawn into a brawling exchange with the Diaz brothers or lose his game plan. Conor has to do that. I think it's really difficult for anyone to do that, and I just don't see how it happens. You know, Nate just has to be who he is. And if Conor makes the adjustments, Nate doesn't have the adjustments to make back, so Conor can win. But I just don't know that happens.
So you've brilliantly covered my second question, which was how can McGregor win? The follow-up, though, is if he does win, okay, whatever the odds are, if he does win, do you think there's going to be a third fight, and should it be at 155?
I do think there will be a third fight. I don't think they'll run it back immediately. But it's possible. I think it should definitely be at 155. Not doing it at 155 the first time made sense because it was 10 days notice. Nate would have had to make a cut. But, that's fine. There's a kernel of sense in doing it at 170 this time because Conor is trying to get back the win, and so he wants everything to be the same. But it should be at 155 this time, and frankly, a third endeavor. I think a third fight would be at 155 because if Conor has won at 170, now they're 1-1 apiece at 170. Well, let's fight at the real weight we should do. I think if he wins, there's no way a third fight doesn't happen. Whether it happens next I think it doesn't, but maybe. If Conor wins controversially or something, then like he wins a decision and it's a crap decision, then they probably do run it back at the end of this year, which would be interesting. But I think if Conor wins and if Conor can win convincingly, and that's the thing that I think is least likely. He keeps saying he's going to knock him out in 2, and just straight up, if he knocks him out in 2, I will be stunned. If he finishes Nate Diaz, genuinely finishes him, and not gets a stoppage on cuts, I will be flabbergasted. I think Conor. That's the other thing about doing this fight back. Conor can win, but Conor's by far most likely way to win is a decision, and so when you got tapped in 2 rounds, winning a decision is super not as impressive. So that's my man. The whole thing about redoing it, and I don't think they redo a third immediately because that's a back pocket fight. They can put it whenever they have a big fight card. I think if he wins, my best guess is that he fights Eddie Alvarez for the lightweight title in Madison Square Garden at the New York show. That is my best guess because it's a fight Eddie Alvarez wants. It's the fight they were trying to make before Nate Diaz kind of kicked over the apple cart when Dos Anjos, the lightweight champion, got hurt. So I think they probably just make that and try and re-put Conor back in there. I think Conor probably leaves 145 because I just don't know if he can make the division anymore, and he doesn't care about it. And kind of with good reason that he doesn't care about it. I think the Jose Aldo fight is a big fight there. The rematch is big because Aldo got an interim belt, and I think it's still a compelling fight. But he also did, sleep Aldo in 13 seconds, so it's hard. I just don't think he cares too much about it, and his entire career has been dictated by wanting the next big thing and the next big challenge and the next thing, and it's an awesome thing for fans to watch. And so I think he takes the lightweight title fight against Eddie Alvarez, then win or lose that fight. Frankly, if that's what happens and he fights Eddie Alvarez, win or lose, I think UFC 209 is, I think, sometime in March, or maybe, I think sometime in March of next year. because I was just looking at this the other day, or that's roughly the timeline this will fall into is March, and 209 being the area code of Stockton. Everyone just sort of assumes that UFC 209 is going to have the Diaz brothers on it in some capacity. And so it would be a kind of fun. Joe Silva, the matchmaker for the UFC, does a lot of interesting, quirky things that if you're a hardcore fan, you'd start noticing. The way he'll match up fighters are just inside jokes to him in a lot of ways. Because fighter's name, John Howard, whose fight nickname is Doomsday, fought Kurt Pellegrino, whose nickname is Batman or whatever. And so he does fun little inside. Yeah, exactly. He does fun inside joke things to himself. And so this would even be, frankly, more than just an inside joke. But doing 209 with the Diaz brothers on it, and win or lose, Conor McGregor can fight Nate Diaz on a third time there, and it's a big fight. And my best guess is that's what happens.
And we're speaking with Jed Meshew of MMAfighting.com. Jed, for the novice MMA fighting fan like myself, and we're going to close out the discussion on Diaz versus McGregor. So who wins in your heart of hearts?
Nate Diaz wins. Nate Diaz absolutely wins. I think it takes him a little longer this time because I think Conor McGregor is a really smart guy. It is just he's a very smart guy. He's a smart fighter, and so I think it takes him a little longer. I think Conor will come out with an appropriate game plan. He won't throw as much, as hard. He won't gas out as early because of that. But eventually he's going to get dragged into the kind of fight that is not sustainable for him. And the other thing about the first fight that people haven't really mentioned a lot is that Conor McGregor won the first round. That's kind of been the story being told as well. I was winning the first round and I got tired. And he did. He won the first round. But he won the first round sort of as a result, or not sort of, I mean in a lot of ways as a result of doing things that take a bunch of energy. And so it's a fundamentally flawed idea to just say, I won't get tired. If we go to a marathon and I go at a dead sprint at the beginning, I'll be winning the first 200 yards of the marathon. For me to just say, I lost the marathon tired, it doesn't work that way. I can't dead sprint for 26 miles. Like, you can't do that. And I think that there's a little of column A and a little of column B, and I think that plays a lot more of a role here than anybody's giving it credit for. Conor had a lot of success because Conor was exploding forward to cover the distance. Nate Diaz is bigger than him. He's got to cover a lot more range to get there, and so he was successful in doing that. But I don't think that's a thing that he can just come in and be like, I'm just going to not do that as much. Because if he doesn't do these big energy-sapping things, then he's going to not be winning the round. So it's a real tough look for Conor McGregor. It's probably the worst style matchup you can imagine for him. So, Nate Diaz is going to win. I think he'll stop him in the third round. I think maybe the fourth, but I think he stops him again. Probably another submission. And Conor should thank him if he submits him, because realistically in the first fight, this fight could have been delayed a little bit more. Like, the first time was a mercy tapping. Nate could have just sat on him and punched his face in until a ref got in the way, and he mercy tapped him. And so I think he kind of gets mercy tapped again here.
So, Jed, we had 3 straight title changes in the women's bantamweight division. Do you see Nunes or anyone else taking control?
No, not for a while. I think that division is a chaotic division right now. I thought Holly Holm, when she took the belt, was gonna end up taking control, because I didn't see anybody who could really give her a run. She seemed to have turned a corner in her career. And then Mish Tate had my favorite moment of the year. I I just thought Miesha Tate's win was hilarious and awesome and brilliant, and then Miesha Tate got run over. Amanda Nunes is a good fighter, but she has a lot of very clear flaws, and I would be pretty I think she probably loses the belt in her next fight, regardless of who it's to. Now, Ronda Rousey is the fight she wants, and depending on how Ronda looks when she comes back, that's kind of up in the air. But I think Ronda probably should win that fight if she's anywhere near what she was before Holly Holm kicked her head off. Excuse me. And if not, then Juliana Pena appears to be next in line, and I think Juliana Pena probably wins that fight too. Amanda Nunes is great for about 8 minutes, and if you can just weather that storm, then you're probably going to take her out. And so, I don't. If Juliana Pena wins, I don't know that Juliana Pena keeps the title for any amount of time. I mean, it's just there are a lot of good competitive fighters in that division. Everybody has weaknesses that are exploitable, and so it'll be interesting. I honestly think that the person best suited to put together another run would be Ronda, but I also think that if Ronda rematches Holly Holm, you can't really pick Ronda in that fight. From training videos and stuff, she's made no discernible improvements to her game or really addressed the loss in a way that would make you think, oh, she's going to make the appropriate changes to win here. So I think that belt probably keeps changing hands for a little bit, which is interesting. I don't mind it, but I know the UFC usually prefers to have some sort of consistent champion because it's easier to build around.
Yeah, like you said, styles make fights, and the Holm Rousey one definitely did. And I agree, Miesha Tate's win was awesome. I love that fight. On to out of the octagon, PEDs in MMA. Do you think they're getting a good handle on it? And do you think John Jones should be allowed back in the UFC?
So this is a super complicated issue, and a question that has a little deeper than that.
That's why we're asking you, because you have the answers.
We'll go on the first part. Are they getting a handle on it? That depends on your stance on PEDs, in my opinion at least. I think USADA is pretty decent at doing what they do. They're not. Mm-hmm. They have some flaws. Starting with, frankly, their ban list is not always well thought out or reasoned or has any reason behind it almost at all. And so that has created some questions and some controversies. But I mean, if your goal is to remove disallow fighters from using X amount of substances, USADA is good at that. Like random drug testing is good for that. There are some real questions about how USADA operates and whether they are truly disassociated from the UFC in a way that is acceptable. If I'm trying to think of the best way to word this, if the UFC doesn't have any influence on how they operate, there are some questions on whether that is the case or not. But I think that if your goal is to get PEDs out of the sport, USADA is at the very least a good starting point, a good thing to do. I think that there is a real question to be had over PED use, frankly, in all sports. And I'm sort of in the camp that doesn't really care. I think you're sort of drawing arbitrary lines, and with the banned substance list from USADA for MMA, the lines are drawn far deeper than I think you really want to or is necessary. I think PED use is a losing battle. We're spending a lot of money and time and energy, and in a lot of ways I think it's just sort of an antiquated old man viewpoint of, well, in my day we didn't do these things, and like you didn't have the things to do in your day. And so yeah, I'm sorry that Hank Aaron's home run record fell. That sure is a shame, but like you just kind of got to get with the times. And you know, in your day, if people tore their ACL, they were done for their career, so that sucked. And now we have ways to improve people, and that's really in a lot of ways what PEDs are. They're ways to better things. And so I think it's kind of losing battle in a lot of ways, and it's a lot of hand-wringing and pearl clutching that isn't super necessary. And PED use, frankly, PED use in a lot of ways, especially in a recuperative capacity, I am all for that. If you want to have an argument about taking, things that improve you beyond X amount, that increase muscle mass or what have you, we can have that conversation. But I think that if what you're taking is something to, I got injured in training, this helps me recover faster, why wouldn't we allow that? Like, it's better for every sport, and particularly for a violent combat sport like mixed martial arts, to be like, oh, this guy's training really hard, he can get back in the cage faster if we do this. Like, let's let them heal their bodies in the best way. So I think that there needs to be a more nuanced conversation about PEDs, but I don't think we're likely to get it because it's very villagers and pitchforks when you start talking about that. And as for John Jones, that will be determined. I have no idea how closely you have followed this. There has been talk this week that he may return sooner than thought. The general consensus prior to this last week was that he was probably getting a 2-year suspension, because that's the standard suspension from USADA for failing a drug test, for having a banned substance in your system. The talk this week has been that, and nothing official has come out as of yet, that what was in his system maybe he might have taken it unintentionally, and that it might not have been what it was thought. And so all that kind of has to shake out. He failed for estrogen blockers. There were two estrogen blockers in his system, which is what flagged the test, and those are banned. Those are banned because they help people take them after coming off a steroid cycle. So that's why they're a banned substance. And he, again, nothing official has come out. The general idea has been that it's a banned supplement, or that it's a tainted supplement that kind of caused these things. But then in the last week, I think Michael Bisping started the rumor, or at least gave the biggest voice to the rumor, that it was a generic brand of Cialis, the like Viagra or whatever. I think that's what Cialis is, something like that. And so that he took a generic brand of that, and that was tainted or laced, and that's what caused it. And so there's precedent that he might, instead of getting 2 years, he may only get a 6 months for it. I would like to see him back. He's maybe the best fighter of all time. He's the best 205-pound fighter in the world right now, and certainly of all time. So, like I said, I don't particularly care too much about PED use in general, so I would super like to see him back. Worst comes to worst, he comes back in 2 years, and then he should definitely come back. It'll be a different landscape. It'll be a different odds thing, but I hope he comes back, because I think the sport's a more interesting, compelling place with him in it.
So Jed has established a few things. First, don't take knockoff drugs that you bought off the internet. That's bad. John Jones is an excellent fighter, even though he's an asshole. And Jed himself is a Philistine regarding PEDs and doesn't care if people cheat. So we like that.
Well, John Jones shouldn't be your benchmark for not doing this. Anderson Silva, when he got popped, he blamed it on a sex thing, a sex-tied sex juice or some garbage. Don't take a generic brand of anything. In medicine,
what is John? John Jones is young. He doesn't need to take that stuff anyway. That's comical. Ted and I, we need to take that. We're itching. I'm far be it for me to cast aspersions on a man's private life.
You do what you got to do, Johnny. That is not on me. But why is he taking a generic brand? He's not poor.
Exactly. He can buy it. I think he can afford it.
I believe firmly. I want to tell you guys this. I believe firmly that in taking generic things, when I go to Kroger, I buy generic Kroger peanut butter and stuff. I'm fine with all of that, but I do draw the line at most of my medicinal use, and maybe that's just me being stupid. I don't know, but I feel a lot more comfortable if I am going to go. I would much rather have actual Plan B than generic version, because it's just a more comfortable feel. Put that extra $10 down to feel good about it. And if John Jones had done that, maybe he wouldn't have popped for his test.
Well, seriously, and for a lot of drugs, there are no legitimate generic versions. And like Viagra, they constantly find some other ingredient so they can keep the money chain rolling in. And Cialis is more recent than that. So there isn't a legitimate generic version. So I think that's his issue. But on to another topic, and this is our last actual question for you before we thank you for being amazing, because, man, we have found our new MMA correspondent for sure. Do you think the UFC fighters should unionize? And how likely is it going to be that they will be able to form a union?
The answer to that first question is a laughable yes. The fact that they haven't done so is really ridiculous. And yeah, they're going to. I believe that this time they finally will. This very recently, the last couple of weeks, there's been a push to unionize or to get a fighters association by a bunch of people who are good at this. There has been some sort of a fighters association current, like a group trying to push it forward for, I think it's been like 7 years now. It really never gained traction. But in the last month, there has been a push by a group of like lawyers and Hollywood bigwigs and people who know this space and know this sphere to do that. And this past week, just yesterday or the day before, they put together a press conference in Las Vegas, trying to attract fighters and stuff to come see about what they're pitching, to get fighters to kind of unionize. I think definitely now is the time that they almost certainly will, and I think a lot of it has to do with the $4 billion sale price tag. I think fighters finally,
right,
because for years the UFC operated in a very cloak and dagger way, and they still do. You don't really know exactly how much people are getting paid, and they did that for very clear reasons. I think best estimates show that the revenue split is somewhere in 15% for the fighters.
Right, that's what I've read too.
Yeah, which is, I mean, most major league sports have a 50-50 revenue split, and you can argue that, frankly, that's underpaying the athletes. So a 15% split is exceptionally low, and I think they kind of shined a light on it when they sold, and why would the Fertittas wouldn't care? They're selling, they're out of it. But when they put a very clear monetary value, this company is worth $4.2 billion, then that is also throwing up a flag to all the fighters saying, this is your worth. Collectively, you are worth half of this.
Right.
You're not getting
Exactly.
paid it. So they should have unionized years and years ago, because even the reality is we've been talking about this for a long time in the sport, and everybody knew it. Nobody is surprised that, fighters are underpaid. Even considering like all factors, they're still getting way less money than everybody would assume a revenue split would go. But now they buried their heads in the sand, or they thought, well, I'm getting paid, I don't need to. I think now everybody's realized, even the stars have realized it, and I think that's the big thing, because if you're making a lot of money, you're not affected by the fact that some guys are making $8,000 to fight on the undercard, and so you don't care as much. But now everybody across the board realizes, oh, we're all underpaid. Even Conor McGregor is underpaid. Like,
yes.
He makes the most money of anyone in the UFC, still underpaid. And he has the most leverage to make himself paid, to get paid even by himself. Now he can create that interest and be like, hey, I'm not going to fight, pay me more money. But he gets even more leverage if all of the fighters are saying that. Whatever Conor McGregor's leverage is now, it's not enough leverage to get him paid commensurate with his value to the company, because he's still just one man, and they can always eat the loss of one man. If 70% of the fighters say we're not going to do this, they can't. They're going to have to come off that money. So I think everybody who's now realized, oh, we're all underpaid, and so they're eventually going to make it. I don't think it happens in the next year, but I think this push to unionize I think this is going to take. It might take a little bit to get it going, get the ball rolling, get everybody to kind of finally be okay with it. It's going to take a leap of faith by some big names, at least, to draw people in. But I think this is it, because it's run by smart people, and everybody now realizes, well, this is the time to do this. So, yeah, I think they're going to. The fact that they haven't until now is pretty ridiculous. So, good for them. They deserve to get paid.
Hey,
yeah, like you said.
Jed, I'm sorry. Hey,
jump in.
No, I have one last question that's probably going to drive you crazy, Todd. And I don't want to ask it, but I got to ask it. And the question is to Jed. We saw something in UFC 200. We saw the elephant in the room show up after a 5-year absence. We've heard about him getting popped and, PEDs or what, something that was illegal in his system. Will we see Brock Lesnar back in the octagon ever again?
Ooh, that's a good question, actually. If you had asked me that immediately after UFC 200, I would have said 100% yes. There's just no way he wasn't going to come back. He came back. He looked phenomenal when he came back. And it's a terrible thing, but the reality is one of the 10 best heavyweight fighters in the world isn't competing in the UFC. Honestly, probably 2 of the 10 best heavyweight fighters in the world aren't competing in MMA. So that's pretty amazing. He makes so much money to come compete for the UFC. He had a $2.5 million base pay, which is the highest they've ever given anybody. Plus, he got pay-per-view points. We don't have the numbers on how that pay-per-view did. I'm sure it did well, maybe not spectacularly, but it's still, looking at him picking up another $8 million, maybe. That's almost pure speculation. But he picked up several more $1 million beyond it. And he likes to fight. Is the other? He enjoys it. I don't think Brock Lesnar is a really smart businessman. And I think that's sort of the driving force in who he is maximizing his value monetarily. And if he had the option to come back, he takes it. That is what I believe. If he has the opportunity to return to the UFC, I think he takes it, because it's another $10 million payday to do something that he does enjoy. And so who wouldn't take $10 million to go do something they like to do? Whether that option exists now because of his failed drug test is a more complicated question. And I'm not really sure how it shakes out. He's got an appeal to the process that he can pursue. But he's in a different boat from John Jones in that he's much older. John Jones is 29. I think Brock's like 37, 36, something like that. He's in his late 30s. And so Brock, sitting out whatever time they determine that he has to sit out. He's 39. Wow, look at that. It's a little different for him to come back at 41 or 42 and do that if he wants to even sit out. My gut says we see him back, but it's way less sure. It's a way less sure thing than it was in July. I think if you asked anybody in the sport in July, like anybody down in the trenches of the sport, they all would have said, "Yeah, Brock's coming back." My guess is next year, like Super Bowl card, the February, March kind of card that the UFC usually puts together. He'll come back then. He'll fight somebody, whoever it doesn't matter. He could fight a broomstick. That nobody would care. People will still buy it. So my gut says he comes back one more time. I think it's a lot less sure than it was, 2 months ago.
And hopefully he fights Samoa Joe. That's the only fight I would pay to see him take on.
Oh, come on. You wouldn't pay to see him fight anybody else? He's one of the 10 best heavyweights in the world.
I detest him. But, Jed, I don't detest you. You were fantastic. Where can our listeners find you on the internet and social media? And do you do a podcast or strictly blogging?
I'm strictly a writer at the moment, although I'm trying eventually to get a podcast together.
That needs to change, sir.
I'm working on it. It's a slow process because there are a lot of podcasts, and I don't just want to be me talking. So I have to find another person to do it with and learn how to do it and stuff like that. Because I don't want to half-ass something. I'd like it to at least be good if I was going to do it. So I'm working on that at the moment, but you can find me on Twitter at Jed K. Meshew, JedKMeshew. You can find my writing is at MMAfighting.com, and I actually had my piece just went live 20 minutes ago. It's a complete gambling breakdown of UFC 202, looking at all the odds and stuff and analysis of the fights, so check that out. And yeah, that's where you can find me.
You were excellent. Thank you so much. And if that was an audition tape, you killed it. Oh my God.
Well, I thank you. I had fun. I love talking about this stuff, and that's partly why I want to do a podcast, because I like talking to people about the things, and so it was awesome. I enjoyed it, fellas. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hey. You're most welcome.
Have a good one. Let me know next time you guys want to talk about some UFC. I'll be happy to come talk.
Got it. You got it.
Take care, fellas.
All right.
That was excellent. Excellent.
That was awesome. That was awesome.
Ted is busy breathing. He couldn't speak for a moment.
That was awesome. Jed he exceeded what my expectations was, hey, someone's